In the silent vastness of the desert, where the wind blows as if it held ancient secrets, a group of archaeologists stumbled upon something that shouldn't exist. It was just another excavation in search of forgotten remains, or so they believed, until their eyes fell upon a partially buried structure that seemed to defy logic itself. Before them, colossal stone blocks rose, some larger than entire houses, fitted together with a precision that not even modern machines could replicate. This was no ordinary village or familiar ruins. What emerged from the sand had the imposing presence of an entire city, built on a monumental scale, as if made not for men, but for giants. The impact was immediate. Amid murmurs and incredulous looks, the archaeologists realized they were facing something that could rewrite the history of civilization. The first measurements already revealed disturbing signs. The stones were polished to perfect angles, as if they had been shaped with intense heat or unknown technology. Some of them were arranged in precise alignments with constellations, as if the sky had been the map and the earth merely the stage. No conventional explanation seemed to fit. There were engraved marks resembling astronomical symbols, lines pointing to the solstice, and underground passages aligned with the rising moon. It was as if the entire city had been built not just as a dwelling, but as a cosmic temple. The most unsettling thing, however, was not just the architecture, but the strange sensation that lingered over the place. Workers reported chills, subtle sounds coming from the rocks, and even the feeling that they were being watched. Soon, the tales of ancient peoples gained traction in everyone's minds. Forgotten chronicles spoke of celestial beings who descended in time immemorial to teach the arts of construction, astronomy, and writing. To science, these were mere mythology. To the archaeologists, faced with these impossible stones, the myths began to sound like descriptions of real events. One of them muttered, "It's as if we're excavating a memory from the gods." This phrase spread throughout the camp, and the weight of the discovery fell upon everyone like a shadow. The news spread quickly, attracting the attention of experts and staunch skeptics alike. But in that initial moment, even before the controversy erupted, there was only bewilderment among those present. The feeling was that they had just opened a door that had remained sealed for millennia. A lost city built by unknown hands appeared before their eyes, and the inevitable question echoed. Were these vestiges of a civilization far more advanced than we imagine, or evidence that non-human forces once walked the earth? The silence of the desert offered no answer, but each stone seemed to carry a message. And so, without realizing it, those archaeologists were about to begin not just an excavation, but a journey that would forever blur the boundaries between myth, history, and mystery. Centuries before any excavation, the region was already surrounded by stories that defied logic. Ancient peoples, who lived and disappeared leaving almost no trace beyond oral memory, spoke of a city built where the sky touched the earth. For them, there was no doubt. Beings from the stars had descended in vehicles of light and taught mankind the art of construction, astronomy, and rituals. These narratives, considered mere legends by modern historians, have always been treated as metaphors, the fruit of the mystical imagination of cultures without access to science. But as archaeologists unearthed immense blocks of stone and inexplicable underground corridors, these myths began to sound less like fables and more like coded accounts of something real. The region where the lost city emerged was not unknown to explorers. For centuries, travelers reported seeing strange formations as if parts of a cyclopean structure were trying to emerge from the sand. Some ancient missionaries, recording their passages in manuscripts, described stone walls that did not seem made by human hands and mysterious symbols carved into rocks. Many of these accounts were dismissed as exaggerations or illusions caused by the desert's solitude. But now, with the official discovery, the pieces began to fall into place. The city rising from the sands exactly matched the descriptions of ancient traditions, and the coincidence was too disturbing to ignore. The archaeologists, immersed in the stifling heat and heavy silence of the place, began consulting historical records. They found passages in ancient libraries that spoke of celestial instructors, entities who descended to organize people into villages, teach them how to cultivate and build temples. In some versions, these beings were gods. In others, travelers from the heavens. Curiously, in all the accounts there was an insistent repetition. The city should not be found, for it held knowledge that humanity was not yet ready to receive. This idea of a forbidden place, protected by time and sand, further fueled the aura of mystery. There were also indications that the city's disappearance was no accident. Local traditions spoke of a fall, a punishment, or a deliberate retreat by the celestial builders, as if they themselves had decided to conceal their work. This narrative resonated unsettlingly with what the archaeologists saw: corridors intentionally buried, entrances sealed by giant blocks, warning symbols carved into the walls. It was as if, in the distant past, someone had wished to bury not only a city, but also the truth it held. What intrigued researchers most was that similar legends appeared in different cultures around the world. Accounts of suspended cities, temples built with the help of the heavens, and beings carrying divine fire. How could such distant people share the same memory? Was it merely a figment of collective imagination, or evidence of a common heritage that science still refuses to acknowledge? For some archaeologists, the answer seemed clear. They were facing a missing link between myth and reality. For others, skepticism remained firm, but shaken by the grandeur of the ruins before them. In the heart of the desert, that lost city wasn't just stone and sand. It was a silent testament that the story told in books may be only a fraction of what really happened. And by uncovering these remains, archaeologists not only challenged official science, but also raised a much larger dilemma. To what extent are we willing to accept that the ancients may have received knowledge from forces beyond this world? The team assembled for that expedition were not dreamers or legend hunters. They were trained scientists, accustomed to dealing with dust, bones, fragments, and concrete data. Men and women from respected universities, carrying in their backpacks not only excavation tools, but also years of skepticism. For them, any myth could be explained rationally: coincidence, misinterpretation, or at most, a cultural metaphor. It was this pragmatic spirit that guided them when they decided to investigate that forgotten region, never imagining that their very foundations would be shaken. In command was Professor Elias Navarro, a veteran archaeologist known for his critical stance. For him, every legend hid a grain of reality, but never something supernatural. Accompanying him was Dr. Helena Ruiz, an expert in ancient languages, who believed that every symbol carved in stone was a coded message from the past. Completing the group were young researchers, eager to prove their competence, and local workers who bore a quiet respect for the desert and its stories in their eyes. Among them all, there was a common thread. No one expected to find more than ordinary ruins. In the first few days, the shock was inevitable. As they removed layers of sand, revealing perfect lines of immense stones, the glances exchanged between the team members made it clear that something was not right. Elias, the most skeptical, remained firm in his conviction. He said that every construction, no matter how monumental, could be explained within human limits. However, his voice sounded increasingly unconvincing, especially when Helena pointed out inscriptions that resembled nothing previously catalogued. Circular symbols, aligned with constellations, engraved with such exquisite precision that they seemed made by hands guided by unknown instruments. The local workers, unlike the scientists, showed no surprise. Many avoided looking directly at the newly exposed stones. They murmured ancient prayers among themselves, as if they knew that whatever lay beneath the sand should not be disturbed. This reaction caught Helena's attention, and she began to write down every sentence the residents uttered. She realized that their fear was not idle superstition, but part of a collective memory passed down through generations. The lost city was not just a rumor. It was a known, yet hushed, secret. As the days progressed, the team began to divide into two invisible groups. On one side, those who remained skeptical, trying to find plausible explanations for every detail. On the other, those who already admitted, albeit in whispers, that they were facing something that surpassed all known logic. Helena, increasingly fascinated by the symbols, recorded everything obsessively. Elias, though reluctant, began to lose the firm tone that had always characterized him. His silence in the face of evidence became more eloquent than any justification. The atmosphere in the camp, previously relaxed, became charged with tension. Each unearthed stone seemed to raise more questions than answers. The young archaeologists, who had arrived laughing and full of energy, now worked in silence, attentive to every detail. It was as if everyone felt they were touching something forbidden. And deep down, each knew that from that moment on there was no turning back. The lost city was not only being revealed, but also beginning to reveal its observers. The first structures revealed were enough to provoke astonishment. These were not simple walls erected for defense, nor improvised constructions like those found in ancient villages. The stones emerging from the sand were colossal in size, some weighing over several tons, and were fitted together so perfectly that there was no room even to slide a knife blade between them. It was a work that defied comprehension. Professor Elias, until then the most rational member of the team, observed the blocks with a fixed gaze, as if trying to find a flaw, a hint that could be attributed to chance or known human ingenuity. But there was none. Every straight line, every perfect angle betrayed a technology that seemed out of place in the time when the city should have existed. As archaeologists advanced, they began to realize that the city didn't follow a random layout. There was order, a hidden geometry, almost as if the streets and passages were designed based on cosmic calculations. Helena Ruiz, a scholar of symbols, noticed that many blocks were arranged in precise alignments with constellations visible only at certain times of the year. An underground corridor, for example, pointed directly toward the rising of the moon at its maximum cycle, while a central plaza seemed designed to capture sunlight precisely at the solstice. This was no coincidence. It was a map of the sky carved in stone. The inscriptions were even more disconcerting. Engraved on the walls with delicate lines, they featured interlocking circular and spiral shapes, reminiscent of both astronomical representations and religious symbols. Some archaeologists suggested they might be mere decorations, but Helena insisted they were instructions, perhaps even records of knowledge. The most disturbing detail was that many of these signs were repeated in different cultures across the planet. Similar symbols had been found in South American caves, in Asian temples, and even in African ruins. How could people separated by oceans and millennia share the same visual language? The local workers refused to touch the engraved stones. They claimed they were markings left by celestial instructors, entities who, according to tradition, descended from heaven in time immemorial to guide humanity. One of them quietly stated, "Whoever drew this was not human." The comment echoed in the silence of the desert unanswered. The scientific team, though reluctant to accept supernatural explanations, could not ignore the fact that these symbols escaped any known catalog. Another detail caught his attention. Some of the stones showed signs of fusion, as if they had been shaped by extreme heat, far beyond what fires or primitive tools could produce. The effect resembled molten glass, solidified at perfect angles. Elias, ever critical, tried to explain it away as the result of natural events, perhaps volcanic. But the region had no geological history to support this theory. His silence as he observed the details spoke louder than his attempts at explanation. With each layer of sand removed, the city took shape. Monumental staircases, elevated platforms, and long corridors stretched underground. Everything conveyed a sense of grandeur and purpose. It wasn't just a city for habitation. It seemed a place of worship, of connection to something greater. To Helena, it became increasingly clear that this architecture had been designed to unite the human and the celestial. The mystery grew, and with it, an uneasy feeling that the archaeologists were only scratching the surface of a revelation far greater than they could bear. As the lost city revealed itself beneath the sand, a recurring theme began to emerge in the camp's conversations: ancient legends about beings who descended from the heavens to teach humanity. These stories, passed down orally by the peoples of the region, spoke of luminous entities arriving in chariots of fire or birds of light, and who, with their wisdom, built temples, taught writing, and revealed the secrets of the stars. For centuries, scholars dismissed such accounts as mere mythology, metaphors created by primitive peoples to explain phenomena they didn't understand. But faced with the colossal ruins, aligned with cosmic perfection and engraved with indecipherable symbols, the line between myth and reality began to blur. Helena Ruiz, immersed in the symbols found on the walls, noticed unsettling repetitions. Spirals that resembled galaxies, shapes that clearly represented celestial bodies, and even humanoid figures with unusual proportions, elongated heads, large eyes, arms outstretched toward the sky. "These inscriptions don't just represent gods," she said reflectively. "They're portraits of something they actually saw." The silence that followed each of her observations was dense, because no one dared admit aloud that perhaps these figures could indicate contact with non-human intelligences. Local workers reinforced this air of mystery. For them, there was no doubt that the city was the work of the so-called celestial instructors, guardians who descended in time immemorial and then disappeared, promising to return one day. Some refused to stay after sunset, claiming that the stones held voices and that, at nightfall, murmurs could be heard in the wind as if the city were still alive. Elias Navarro, ever skeptical, dismissed it as superstition, but the unease was evident even in his gaze. After all, how could one explain symbols identical to those of distant cultures without any contact between them? In her nocturnal records, Helena began comparing local findings with legends from other peoples. She found frightening parallels. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki were described as those who descended from heaven to earth. Among the Andean peoples, they spoke of the Viracocha, bearded gods who emerged from the sea to teach the construction of sacred cities. In Egypt, texts spoke of star beings who brought the light of civilization. The similarities were so precise that they ceased to be coincidence and assumed the weight of a pattern. And now, in that forgotten desert, Cyclopean ruins confirmed that perhaps these accounts were more than legend. The entire team began to sense that they were not just facing an archaeological discovery, but something that touched the roots of humanity. If celestial beings had truly descended in ancient times, what motivation guided them? Why build monumental cities and then abandon them to the sand and oblivion? Were they simply transmitting knowledge or leaving deliberate marks so that they might one day be rediscovered? These questions hung in the air, unanswered. The mystery of celestial beings was no longer just a folkloric curiosity. It had become an inseparable part of scientific inquiry. The archaeologists, who had arrived seeking fragments of a lost civilization, now faced the possibility that human history had been shaped by intelligences from elsewhere. And the deeper they excavated, the more evident it became that the city was not just stone and dust, it was a living monument, erected to bear witness to a connection between the human and the divine that modern science had not yet dared to contemplate. The discovery of the lost city quickly spread beyond the desert. The first images sent by the team reached universities and research centers, provoking immediate reactions. However, instead of unanimous admiration, what formed was a wave of resistance. More traditional academic circles were unwilling to accept that an ancient civilization could have reached such a level of sophistication. much less that it could have received assistance from non-human forces. For them, it was all nothing more than an exaggerated interpretation, a biased reading of the ruins. But the power of the images spoke for itself: colossal blocks, impossible alignments, and symbols repeated across different cultures. At camp, Elias Navarro received a harsh message from a colleague at his home university. "Don't be carried away by fantasies," the message read. "Every monument has a rational explanation. Whether earthquakes, erosion, or religious practices, none of these indicate the intervention of gods or celestial beings." Elias read in silence, but the words rang hollow compared to what he himself had seen. How could he explain blocks fused like glass in the middle of the desert, with no record of volcanic activity? How could he deny the precision of the star-aligned corridors built millennia before the invention of formal mathematics? Internal conflict was beginning to grow even in him, the confirmed skeptic. Helena Ruiz, however, reacted differently. For her, academic criticism was expected, but it didn't diminish the power of what they found. Each symbol she copied into her journal reinforced the conviction that they were facing a missing link between myth and science. In nightly meetings at the camp, Helena insisted, "We can't keep pretending this is all coincidence. These symbols are repeated in Egypt, South America, and Asia. There's a global pattern that academia refuses to see." Her words were met with enthusiasm by some younger members of the team, but with caution by the more experienced members, who feared losing credibility by associating the discovery with legend. As the team split, the news spread curiosity and controversy. Some sensationalist outlets ran headlines: "Proof of contact with ancient gods?" Others, more conservative, scoffed, "Another archaeological fantasy to sell books." The pressure mounted. The academic world demanded objective reports, but how could something that aroused so much mystery be reduced to the coldness of data? Every skeptical argument seemed to clash with the silent grandeur of the ruins. This conflict wasn't just external. Within the team itself, two invisible factions formed. On one side were those who wanted to follow the rules of classical archaeology, describing only measurements, dates, and cautious hypotheses. On the other, those who believed it would be dishonest to ignore the possibility that they were dealing with something that transcended human limits. This division became increasingly clear each night as conversations around the campfire took on a debating, almost confrontational tone. Deep down, everyone knew that the real battle lay not just in the desert, but in accepting what those stones represented. It wasn't easy to face the idea that the story told in books might be just an incomplete narrative adjusted to fit within the conveniences of traditional science. The clash between discovery and academic dogma was inevitable, and the further the excavations progressed, the more evident it became that the city hid secrets, capable of shaking not only archaeology but also humanity's own self-image. The days of excavation that followed uncovered pieces that could not be ignored even by the most skeptical. Among colossal blocks and underground corridors, inscriptions began to emerge that defied not only logic, but also the accumulated knowledge of archaeology. In one of the exposed chambers, Helena Ruiz identified symbols identical to those she had previously studied in Egyptian temples. The disturbing detail is that these inscriptions were much older than the officially dated pyramids. How could a civilization from the unknown desert have anticipated codes that would only emerge thousands of years later on another continent? The team also found fragmented statues. Some represented human figures, but others had disturbing features: elongated skulls, disproportionately large eyes, and slender limbs that conveyed the impression of beings beyond the human condition. Helena insisted they could be symbolic representations of deities, but even so, the similarity to mythological accounts of gods from the sky was impossible to ignore. One of the young archaeologists wrote in his diary, "If these sculptures were discovered in any modern museum, they would say they were science fiction." The most impressive find, however, was a partially buried structure that appeared to function as an observatory. It consisted of a circle of perfectly aligned stone columns so that on certain days of the year, sunlight streamed through apertures calculated with eerie precision. When the solstice arrived, the team witnessed the scene. The golden ray penetrated the central corridor and illuminated an inscription at the back of the chamber, revealing symbols that glowed with unusual intensity. Some believed it to be simply mineral pigments reflecting light, but others saw it as a ritual mechanism designed to unite earth and sky in an ancient light show. Furthermore, preliminary analyses revealed something even more disconcerting. Some stone surfaces showed signs of fusion, as if they had been shaped by temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, but there were no volcanoes there, nor any records of technology to justify such a process. It was as if, in ancient times, someone had used an unknown form of energy capable of transforming rock into malleable mass. Elias Navarro, despite trying to remain skeptical, found no solid arguments. In silence, he simply observed those smooth, glass-like surfaces as if they had been melted and molded to perfection. Another disturbing detail was found in the underground passages, remains of a type of metallic material embedded between the stones. Initial analyses suggested an alloy unlike any known in antiquity, with metal proportions difficult to obtain even in modern laboratories. The discovery was immediately recorded but not released to the public, as the risk of discredit and controversy was enormous. For the team, it became increasingly clear that they were dealing with something that not only contradicted official science, but could also forever alter humanity's understanding of its own origins. The disturbing evidence accumulated day by day, as if the city were slowly revealing its secrets in layers to test the courage of those who dared to excavate it. What had previously seemed like mere myth was beginning to take on the contours of reality, and with it came a nagging question. If celestial beings truly helped build the city, why did they choose to abandon it to the silence of the desert? It was during a silent dawn that the climax of the discovery occurred. The team had decided to map one of the underground corridors that remained nearly intact, blocked by enormous stone blocks that appeared to have been placed deliberately to seal the entrance. After hours of effort, they managed to open a narrow passage. The air that escaped was heavy, laden with ancient dust, as if trapped for millennia. Illuminating the interior with flashlights, they saw the impossible, a monumental room, intact, preserved as if time had been unable to touch it. In the center of the hall was a circular platform covered with symbols engraved in a pattern reminiscent of both star maps and geometric diagrams. But the most impressive detail lay on the walls, enormous stone panels with carvings that, under the lantern light, reflected as if coated with a thin metallic layer. The engravings depicted not only stars but winged figures, imposing beings extending their hands to kneeling men. It was a scene of imparting knowledge, a narrative in stone that someone from above had descended to teach. As the team walked through the hall, they noticed something even more disturbing. On the carefully carved ceiling was a perfect representation of the Milky Way. It wasn't a crude imitation, but a precise mapping of stars that could only be seen with advanced instruments. Some of these stars weren't even visible to the naked eye, even on clear nights. How could an ancient people have access to such a level of astronomical detail? The shock was immediate, and even Elias Navarro, always seeking rational explanations, let out a barely audible murmur. This can't be human work. In the corner of the room, an even more disturbing discovery awaited. Helena Ruiz found a sarcophagus-like structure made of black stone, with spiral inscriptions radiating outward from the center, as if representing energy in motion. The artifact appeared not to have been created to house bodies, but rather as a receptacle for power or knowledge. Upon touching the surface, Helena felt a strange vibration, as if an energy still pulsed there, even after centuries. The silence that fell over the group was total. For the first time, Everyone had the same feeling. They were facing something that transcended archaeology and entered the realm of the inexplicable. The climax came when, in a stunning coincidence, a beam of light from the full moon penetrated a fissure in the rock and illuminated the exact center of the circular platform. The symbols on the ground began to reflect intensely, as if designed for that specific moment. It was as if the city had been built to interact with the stars, revealing secrets only when perfect cosmic alignments occurred. For the team, there was no longer any doubt. This was not just a city. It was a mechanism, a stellar temple created to connect directly with the heavens. The emotional impact was devastating. The archaeologists' labored breathing mingled with the absolute silence of the room. No one dared break that moment. What they witnessed was not just an archaeological ruin, but a testament etched in stone that humanity may never have walked alone. When the first preliminary reports reached the scientific community, the impact was immediate, but not in the way archaeologists had hoped. Instead of recognition for the discovery's grandeur, hasty articles appeared attempting to discredit every detail. Images of the inscriptions and colossal structures were dismissed as misinterpretations, or optical illusions reinforced by the team's enthusiasm. Some academics even claimed that the stone blocks were nothing more than natural formations shaped by erosion over the centuries. The explanation sounded convenient, but it failed to account for the perfect fits, the underground corridors, and the precise alignment with the stars. In interviews, experts who had never even set foot on the site were quick to offer alternative theories. One geologist argued that the melting marks on the rocks could have been the result of lightning strikes, even though the melting pattern was too uniform for that. Another suggested that the symbols on the walls were merely meaningless tribal scribblings, despite the clear repetition of patterns found in different parts of the world. Clearly, there was more fear than skepticism, fear of the impact that accepting this discovery could have on the official narrative of human history. Meanwhile, the team members themselves faced resistance at their universities. Ilias Navarro received notices from his superiors advising him not to exaggerate the conclusions and to maintain scientific credibility. Helena Ruiz, on the other hand, was accused of romanticizing archaeology by connecting symbols with narratives of celestial gods. Some colleagues even suggested that she was turning science into superstition. This reaction only strengthened her resolve. "If what we found doesn't fit in the history books," she said, "maybe it's time to rewrite the books." The press also played a crucial role. While independent outlets enthusiastically reported the discoveries, mainstream newspapers ridiculed them, calling them the new invented Atlantis or the imaginary city of alien fanatics. This polarization generated heated debates. On one side, people fascinated by the mystery, seeing in the ruins proof that we are not alone. On the other, critical voices accused the team of fraud, manipulating images, and even seeking fame. Despite attempts to discredit it, there was something impossible to erase: the physical evidence. These weren't just reports, but tangible structures, engraved symbols, and materials that didn't fit the known chronology. The more skeptics tried to suppress it, the more public curiosity grew. Forums, documentaries, and even alternative conferences began to discuss the find. With each debate, the lost city ceased to be just an excavation and became a collective enigma. At camp, the archaeologists watched everything with mixed feelings. On the one hand, frustration at the resistance of official science. On the other, the certainty that what they had found was greater than any academic controversy. They knew they were facing something that could not be hidden forever. And although the skeptics remained in shock, trying to rationalize the impossible, the city remained there, immense and silent, as an indestructible testament to the fact that human history holds chapters we still dare not accept. As the excavations progressed and the discussions multiplied, the lost city ceased to be merely an archaeological discovery and became a mirror of humanity itself. On one side, traditional science, clinging to the comfort of its certainties. On the other, the silent evidence that screamed from within the stones, impossible symbols, blocks that defied engineering, and inscriptions that seemed to speak of a time when men did not walk alone. Between these two forces, only the truth remained, dormant beneath the sand, indifferent to human disputes. At camp, the archaeologists began to realize they hadn't just found a city, they had touched a sensitive nerve in history. Each unearthed stone didn't answer questions, but created new ones. Who were the builders? Where did the knowledge needed to build structures that couldn't even be replicated today come from? And perhaps most disturbingly, why was this city hidden as if someone had deliberately buried it? The answers remain suspended, like distant constellations that can be seen but never touched. Helena Ruiz wrote in her diary, "This is not just a scientific discovery, it is a calling. Something invites us to look to the sky, beyond the boundaries of what we believe we know. Perhaps we are not ready, but the truth can no longer be hidden." Her words reflected the feelings of many there, the sensation that they had crossed an invisible threshold, entering forbidden territory where myth and reality merge. Elias Navarro, while maintaining some caution, could no longer deny the obvious. His silence was now a form of respect. He knew he was facing something that escaped his measuring tools and academic theories. The city, built of stone and silence, seemed to be waiting for this moment. Perhaps it had been built not just as a dwelling, but as a message. A reminder left for the future, indicating that humanity was not born alone, that its trajectory was guided, influenced, or perhaps even shaped by intelligences beyond comprehension. Be they gods, angels, instructors, or visitors from other worlds, the name matters little. The fact is that the work remained there, challenging everyone to look beyond the comfortable versions of history. And this is where the narrative turns to us. Because the greatest mystery lies not just in the stones or the symbols, but in our willingness to face what they suggest. Are we prepared to accept that our history may be much older, more complex, and more cosmic than we imagine? Or would we prefer, like so many skeptics, to close our eyes and reduce everything to convenient coincidences? The silence of the desert, broken only by the wind, continues to guard the city. The giant blocks remain firm, the inscriptions remain engraved, and the alignments still point to the stars. As if the construction itself were a bridge between the human and the divine, waiting for those who dare to cross it. The final question echoes like a whisper left by the builders. Will we have the courage to accept that perhaps we are not the sole authors of our own history?